Hello, everyone. Gabe, a slightly disheveled, more so than usual, mountain man-ish Gabe here from the Spine Crackers podcast. It's the end of February, and I wanted to do a February wrap-up video like I did last month. I'll probably keep doing these because they're fun for me to do, and people seem to like them, so we'll just stick with it. Of the books that I read this month, it was a bit of a slower month compared to January, I suppose. If you watch my January video, I think I got through 10 books in January. I've only got 7 this month, but one of them I think justifies a bit of a slowing down of the pace. And I will talk about that one in a minute. So the first 3, which I won't talk about much, are ones that we all read for the podcast. All those videos will be in the description, and they're on our channel. And the full discussions for all 3 of these books will be up over on the Patreon. So the episodes that we release to the public are usually about an hour or so, and then the Patreon discussions usually go on into the 2.5, sometimes longer range. So an hour and a half usually extra of discussion. So if you are interested in that, you can, or just supporting the show in general, if you like these videos or whatever else, you can support us via Patreon or the Buy Me a Coffee link, which will also be in the description. So the first one is Ice by Anna Kavan. We just released the episode on this at the end of last week, so I won't talk too much about it. I will just direct you to that video. It's a really interesting book, very... Kavan's voice is just so singular to her. It's it's when you're reading something of hers. It feels like, at least from what I've read so far. I do want to read some of the novels that she published under her previous name, her married name, Helen Ferguson, before she changed her name to Anna Kavan after a stint in a mental institution. Because that seems to have been a turning point for her, both obviously intellectually and but also literarily. So I'm curious about reading some of those Helen Ferguson novels. But anyway, Ice by Anna Kavan is the first one. Go check out the episode on that. The second one, Ernst Junger's The Glass Bees. The episode for this is also up on the channel. Another, interestingly, reading these 2, which we did back to back, it's an interesting kind of spin on the science fiction novel. These are both sort of classified as science fiction, and they are in ways, but are also sort of very not traditional science fiction in other ways. And it'll be interesting to compare them to another book that I read this month that is sort of more in the traditional science fiction mode. The third one that I'm not going to talk about a ton is Lori Moore's short story collection, Like Life. We just recorded the episode for this one last night, so that episode will be up at the end of this week. I don't want to spoil our thoughts from the episode too much, but I will be reading more Lori Moore in the future. I'll put it that way. Okay, starting with the things that I read just for myself, or for not for the show. The first one is a nonfiction book. It's a philosophy text. It's Bernard Williams's Ethics and the Limits of Philosophy. We read this as a sort of group read for the Spinecrackers Discord. So if that sounds something like that you're interested in, you can get access to that for $2 a month at the Patreon. And we're just kind of playing around with it for now, seeing what people want to do. It's nothing too formal. The reading group there, we're reading some Chekhov short stories right now, and preparing to read a couple Ursula Le Guin novellas, I believe, in a few weeks. So this was the first book that we did for that group read, and I feel bad because it was sort of my choice. We'd batted around a few ideas, and I had suggested this one, and we wound up doing it. And I had read this book. I feel bad because I had read this book in graduate school and had fond memories of it. And I think Williams is a really strong writer. I like reading Williams's prose, and he's usually quite clear. And so I had fond memories of this book, but it was much more technical and specialized than I had remembered it being, and therefore made for somewhat of a difficult and slash potentially frustrating experience for some of the other people who were trying to get through it with me, and it was for me too in some ways. I think Williams's argument here is that, such as it is essentially that moral or ethical, because he distinguishes between ethical and moral, but moral system making, so the classic Kantian, utilitarian, Aristotelian systems essentially ought to be abandoned, and that a thoroughgoing ethical system in the way that we have sort of historically thought about it in philosophy is something that is sort of a fool's errand. And he has some powerful arguments against some of the specific views, some that I think are a little weaker than he seems to think they are. And certainly there have been developments in all of these moral theories since this book came out. And I found myself feeling like he was both simultaneously moving too fast and too slow in a weird way, which was sort of frustrating. Moving too slowly in terms of getting forth the actual argument that he's trying to make. I felt like there were a lot of digressions that were not necessarily important to his overall point, that could have been long footnotes or something. And also too fast at certain critical moments where I thought that there was a lot more to say, in defense of some of these views that he, doesn't dismiss out of hand, but I thought in certain key places treated a little bit too quickly. So a bit of a frustrating experience, not what I remembered from when I read this book again in school. And I may need to revisit some of Williams's other works. He has another collection of essays that I have on a different topic called Problems of the Self, which I also remember liking very much. So I may revisit that one in the next couple of months just to kind of see if I had gone wrong with Williams when I read him in graduate school, or if I was missing something then that I'm seeing now, or vice versa, perhaps. So the next one is John Wyndham's The Kraken Wakes. John Wyndham is a British science fiction author. I don't know if exclusively science fiction, but that's certainly what he's most known for. Books like The Chrysalids or The Day of the Triffids, and a number of others. This one is about an alien takeover of Earth, essentially, and it follows two journalists, Mike and Phyllis Watson, who kind of happen to be witnesses to the first sort of landing. And the way these aliens work is they... we don't really know. They come in these sort of ships. They're like kind of essentially, what's the term I'm looking for? Like an android. It's not exactly it. It's sort of like half organic material, half inorganic material, sort of landing crafts. And they have these huge sticky tentacles that can shoot out and grab people, and they drag them back into the ocean. And the idea is that they're sort of building a civilization under the ocean, kind of under our noses, and then kind of springing attacks on beachside towns and islands and things like that to sort of expand their influence or their empire, essentially, as sort of a colonial project. Of course, it's never exactly clear what the aliens want or what they're doing or why they're here. And of course, typical sci-fi antics ensue. We try nuclear bombing them, dropping nukes under the ocean, but that has to stop because it's causing, obviously massive environmental damage. And then there's a sort of wacky kind of crackpot scientist character who, of course, turns out to be correct about most of his theories. But I think the real stars of this story is Mike and Phyllis Watson as characters, and specifically their roles as journalists. There's a lot of really interesting commentary here about media in crisis and media in wartime specifically, which is obviously scarily relevant at the present moment. And I thought there was just a lot of incisive commentary on Wyndham's part about the ways in which propaganda functions, the ways in which different media outlets based on their different sort of readership or viewership demographics tailor their messages in very specific ways. There's a lot of scenes and a lot of pages dedicated to Mike and Phyllis going back and forth about, well, where should we try to get this article published and why, and who do we know at that paper? And I could see people getting a little being put off by that in a way, that this is sort of seems superfluous to the story, and it's like, well, this isn't really advancing anything. Why do we have all these domestic scenes of Mike and Phyllis just kind of haggling about the right way to approach writing a story? Why don't we just have the action? And there's plenty of action in this book, by the way. But I really do think those other scenes serve a very important purpose for Windham. And some of the ending of this book, it gets very dark and sort of meditative on life and humanity. And there's almost a sort of, by the end of it, everyone's kind of migrated to high ground, and they're all just sort of living on island outcroppings in what is essentially a flooded Earth that the aliens have sort of melted the ice caps. It was their kind of grand scheme to increase their space in their underwater civilization. And there's all these scenes of life still sort of going on relatively normally, and people with all of their local and regional biases, and it's almost like a Samuel Beckett type point. Like, the human race can sort of get used to any level of degradation, and they're highly adaptable in a way that can be negative. But I won't give away the ending, but so I read this partially because we're going to be doing another John Wyndham novel, The Day of the Triffids, sorry, I'm not sure, on the show in a couple weeks, I think, at the end of March, maybe it'll be the beginning of April, and we're going to have a very special guest for that episode. So be on the lookout for that. And so I wanted to get at least one other Wyndham book under my belt before we did an episode on it, because he's got a pretty wide bibliography, and so I thought it would be a good idea to dip my toes in before we did a full episode on him. Another one by this is sort of different. The next one is The True Deceiver by Tova Jansson, I believe is the pronunciation, or something like that. She's a Finnish author, I believe. And of course, she's mostly famous sort of worldwide, or Swedish. I'm not sure. I think I forget. Let's see. Yeah, so she's born in Helsinki, so Finnish, but she wrote in Swedish. And so she's most famous for her children's books on the Moomins, the family of the Moomins. I have not read any of those. I didn't grow up with Jansson or her writing, like many people in Europe and in that part of the world, I think probably did. So I don't really have that frame of reference. But she also, of course, wrote adult novels, and this is one of them. I knew her because I had purchased another book, just kind of off of the vibes that I saw in a bookstore years and years ago, the Summer book, which she's also relatively well known for. I have not read this yet, but I certainly will in March. And I've wanted to read her, and so I had picked this one up as well. And this is a really interesting book. It's about, a small town in the depths of winter, sort of waiting for the spring thaw to come, and it's about the lives of a number of characters in this town. There's a brother and a sister who are sort of not social outcasts per se, but they're not from the town originally. They're sort of viewed side-eyed as outsiders. The girl is very Katri is her name, and she's very sort of standoffish. She's sort of one of these people who is blunt to the point of disarming people. Have you ever met someone who's just like so honest you're not even mad, you're just kind of like shocked, like you don't really know what to say or how to respond? She's like that, but all the time to everybody. and she sort of has this big dog that she's trained, this big German Shepherd that kind of scares people, and the kids in the town yell at her and call her a witch. And so it's about her and her brother, who's written as kind of sort of slow, not necessarily mentally disabled or needing like a full-time caregiver or anything, but sort of the village slow guy, and people let him hang around. He loves boats, and so he hangs around the boat shop in town with the family of brothers who builds boats, and his dream is to own his own boat. The other major character is an artist who I think, who, like Janssen, is famous for children's books. She doesn't write them usually, but she just does the illustrations, and she's famous for her illustrations of forest floors and the realism and detail that she's able to put into them. But she's also famous for her drawings of rabbits in these scenes as well. And the rabbits are covered with flowers, which is a sort of hint of unrealism in an otherwise very realistic style that this artist has. And so the sort of conflict in the book, if you could call it that, Anna, by the way, is the name of the artist, is that Anna's sort of aging. She lives on this hill kind of outside of town, and she's difficult to, she doesn't really come out much, especially in the winter. She really only comes out in the spring to do her drawings of the forest floor. That's sort of her season. And so the conflict in the book is basically that Katri is sort of scheming to get some of Anna's money, essentially, and maybe even her entire home and inherit, and whatever she has left, because she doesn't have kids, she's not married anymore. I think her husband died. I forget exactly the details. But Katri and her brother ultimately wind up moving in with Anna, and Katri sort of forces her way into Anna's life through not deception per se, although the true deceiver is the title of the story. There's a lot to talk about with what that title means. And she starts doing her finances and helping her with contracts with these publishers, and people want to put her rabbits on sneakers and hats, and use it for Coca-Cola commercials and whatnot. And I just can't help but feel like this is a self-insert on Janssen's part, who I'm sure got all sorts of those requests for the Moomins. I think they mention in the afterword or in the foreword here that it's not fully true to Janssen's life, in the sense that she was actually pretty savvy and engaged with those things, and didn't kind of let all this mail pile up and never answer anybody the way that Anna does in this story. So it's, anyway, it's a strange and deceptively complicated story about the relationship that develops between Katri and Anna, and Katri's brother, whose name is escaping me. And a lot of rich symbolism in the transitions from winter to spring. And they, at one point when Katri and her brother move in, they sort of take all of Anna's old possessions that she doesn't need anymore, some of her garbage, some old furniture, and they just pile it on the ice on the lake that's next to her house. And there's this whole tension throughout the book of waiting for spring to come and the ice to finally crack, and all of these memories and these old things just falling into the lake. So I was impressed. I was sort of reading it, and I was like, is this, it's a simple book, simple plot, simple language. But there really is, I think, a lot going on, and I'm excited to read the summer book very soon. The final one, and this is the reason that I only read 7 books this month, is that for the first time in my life, ashamedly, I read Herman Melville's Moby Dick. What is there to say, really? It's a towering work. It's transcendently genius, blah, 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 blah. All of those things are true. It's one of those books that the hype is not only fully justified, but undersells it. I think a lot of people think of Moby Dick as just one of these sort of cultural artifacts that you have likely absorbed through osmosis a lot of information about already. Most people know the character Ahab. Most people know that he has an ivory leg. Most people know the first line, "Call me Ishmael." Most people know, maybe the name of the Pequod, the whaling boat, and some other details. Maybe you've seen a film adaptation or something. So it's one of those works that is just, the phrase "the white whale," what's your white whale? These things have just sort of seeped into American culture, similar to something like a Gatsby or some of these other novels. And I think that it's tempting and easy to sort of get a level of complacency with works like that, where you're like, well, I've basically already read it. I basically know what happens. I know the characters. Okay, crazy captain trying to find this whale that bit off his leg. And that is the plot of the novel. But Melville's concerns here are so broad, so all-encompassing, and his language so beautiful and searching, and just the mix of really just fun action pieces and philosophical monologues and scientific digressions into the biology and sort of physical makeup of whales, which don't skip those, by the way. I've heard a few people say that they were told by people that you can skip those parts. You absolutely cannot. That would be just a deep disservice to the novel and to yourself, frankly, if you were to try to read this, skimming or skipping some of those, technical sections about whaling and the history of whaling and the biology of whales and all that. It's those are integral to the novel. I'm not going to talk about that a ton now, but I will probably do a video on this one for the Patreon, maybe. That's a little bit more in depth. I wanted to read it just, because it was time in my life. I read Infinite Jest last year and was looking for the next sort of big book. And we did the episode on Melville's The Confidence Man, which just blew me away similarly. So I thought I should read this one. Melville, we were talking about Melville, I think, last night before we were recording, and someone, and Matt, I think, just said, like, Melville was just on one, like, his whole life. Like, his life is so fascinating, and his writing is just otherworldly brilliant. So, yeah, read Moby Dick if you haven't. Don't skip the whale parts. That's what I have to say about that. So, yeah, those were my February reads. I'll probably, because I just finished Moby Dick a couple days ago, I'll probably move back to some shorter fiction for the next couple weeks, just to kind of give myself a reset, and then maybe move into something bigger after that. If you have any ideas or suggestions for what that next big book or important book or whatever that I should read is, let me know, or any books, really. Happy to always take recommendations. I hope you enjoyed the video. Again, if you want to support the show or the channel, the Patreon links will be below. Again, you get all of our full-length, uncut discussions of all of the books we review for the podcast, as well as access to the Discord, and bonus content, bonus videos, reviews, things like that. So, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.